So thank you very much. Good evening. I think we are going live now. You know that if there's any problem, you can chat me over the WhatsApp and also in Facebook. So thank you very much for joining us. Welcome to the second public lecture of the second season of the COGNiMATH seminar, A Night with Science. I sent an effective greeting to all my students. You know that I am very proud of you, and without you, this will not be possible. So for me today is an honor, and it's very special for me to have Jim Cline participating with us. Jim is one of the more significant people in my life. I will always be deeply grateful to him for all his support, his kindness, and for accepting me as his postdoctoral fellow. McGill, Montreal is my home, and in large part is due to everything Jim did for me. From inviting me to a Christmas concert where he sang in his car, lending me a bicycle to get to my office, supporting my wife with her arrival, and always be an excellent human being with us. Jim was the first person who knew that we were expecting a baby, that we were pregnant. He supported me a lot before I arrived to the Faculty of Psychology, and he was a strong support all these years in the face of difficulties and difficult times that I have. Jim, for that and much more, with all my heart, thank you very much. And thank you very much for accepting our invitation to talk with us a little bit about your career in theoretical physics. So let me introduce our guest a little bit with a brief summary of his career. So Dr. James Cline obtained his PhD from the California Institute of Technology with John Preskill, also his master's degree from the California Institute of Technology, and his bachelor from the Harvey Mudd College at California. He's a professor at McGill University at the Department of Physics in the Group of High Energy Physics. He has also been a visiting scientist at CERN, Perimeter Institute, Nordita, Seclais in France. He has had a lot of research grants, a lot of invitated colloquia, schools, and plenary talks. Just to mention a few, in 2018, TASI from the Nordic Winter School, Cosmology, also in Aspen Center of Physics, also in Legouche, in the summer school in France, also in strings, in the conference strings. He has advisoring a lot of graduate students since 2000. He has a lot of research activities involving particle physics and cosmology and the very early universe. He has a lot of citations. I took the opportunity to look yesterday to have the updated. Is around 9,600 citations from his papers. So Jim, thank you very much for this great opportunity to have you here. So the stage is all yours, and it's so nice to see you again.
Thanks for those kind words, Alfonso, and thank you very much for the invitation. I'm really happy to be here. And I hope I didn't screw up my screen sharing. Do you see it okay? I moved it to a different desktop. Do I need to move it back?
No, you need only to go again and share a screen and select the window.
Oh, okay. Application window. Here we go. Okay.
Great.
We're fine now. Well, I wanted to tell you a story. Basically, this is something that happened to me a few years ago. The purpose of my story is I just wanted to illustrate what it can be like to be a theoretical physicist or maybe other kinds of theoretical scientists. I'm sure it's similar. This was a very special time for me. In 2015, I had an opportunity to visit the Niels Bohr Institute in Copenhagen. It's a very old and prestigious institute. Niels Bohr was one of the founders of quantum mechanics, and it's in this fabulous city, Copenhagen, Denmark, which I've been visiting for many years. And if you can believe it, this was the view from the apartment they gave me. They were able to give out apartments sponsored by one of the banks for visiting scientists. And so this is Nyhavn Street. It's a very popular touristic street, and a beautiful setting for doing physics or anything else you could imagine. Well, I was able to bring my little folding bike there, and I'm a great lover of cycling, and Copenhagen and Denmark is a fabulous place for doing cycling. And so, apart from just doing physics, it was a nice place to get inspiration. And so let me get into this little physics puzzle, which was it was becoming very exciting around the time when I was visiting. It was an experimental puzzle that was noticed by some experiments, a few experiments around the world, one at the Large Hadron Collider at CERN, another at an experiment called BABAR in California. What I'm showing you here are pictures, they're called Feynman diagrams. They're pictures of particles decaying. And so these are diagrams where we have time going to the right and space going vertically. And so what you're seeing here is a diagrammatic illustration of a certain kind of particle, a bottom quark. It goes along, it decays into another sort of quark called a charm quark by emitting a W boson. And then the W boson decays into an electron and an anti-electron neutrino. So maybe you don't know much about particle physics. Electron is the one particle in this whole discussion which is the most familiar. And bottom quark and charm quark, these are heavy partners of the kinds of particles that we are made of, like neutrons and protons are made of quarks as well. So these are kind of heavy cousins to the quarks that we're more familiar with. And in addition to the quarks having heavier cousins, the electron has a heavier cousin. This one is called the mu particle, and there's a third one called the tau particle. Everything comes in threes. These are families. The lightest family, the second family, the third family. And the interesting thing in the standard model of particle physics, or a striking thing, is that this W boson particle couples in exactly the same way to all of these electron, muon, and tau, and their neutrinos, which are very light particles. And so if you could ignore small effects coming from the fact that the tau is a bit heavier, or quite a bit heavier than the mu, which is quite a bit heavier than the electron, apart from those differences, all of these different decays should happen exactly the same way, with exactly the same probability. And then we can correct for the fact that all these masses are not quite the same, and calculate by how much these three different kinds of decays should differ from each other. And what was noticed is that this third one, involving the tau, was too small. It didn't agree with what we expected from our beloved and well understood standard model of particle physics. Okay, so that was a puzzle that was going on at this time while I was visiting Copenhagen, and a friend of mine who's also a theorist there, he called it to my attention, and we started discussing it and trying to think of what could be an explanation for this. And we noticed that there were a few other funny things going on involving this tau particle, the heavy cousin of the electron. And that was, there were some particles made of bound states of a bottom quark and the up quark, or its antiparticle. This is a bound state. They're bound together into something that we call a meson. And this meson could decay in a similar way to what we just saw before. It emits the W, decays into the tau and to the neutrino. And this turned out, experimentally, it's a bit too big compared to the prediction. And even if you take away this part of the diagram and just look at how W bosons decay into these particles, this is also a little bit too big. So we're starting to see a pattern here. It looks like there's a problem with everything involving the tau. It seems to like to couple a little bit differently to the W boson than it's supposed to, because they're supposed to be all the same. And so we were wondering, could we try to perhaps tie all of these three observations together with some single explanation? And the explanation that we started throwing around was the idea of Higgs, having an extra Higgs boson. So if you know particle physics a bit, you may know that the Higgs boson, it's the last particle in the Standard Model that was experimentally discovered. That was at the Large Hadron Collider. That was discovered a few years before this time that I'm talking about. And it's a famous particle because it gives mass to all the other particles. But it's possible that maybe there's not just one Higgs boson. In the Standard Model, there's just one. But it could be that nature provides some extra Higgs bosons that we just hadn't discovered yet. And it turns out that if that was the case, then they would come in groups like this. There would be one that has no electric charge, and then there would be a partner that has electric charge plus or minus 1 in units of the electron or the proton charge. Anyway, so many people have thought about this idea that there could be extra Higgs bosons. And we realized that this idea could help us to explain the puzzle. Because if you have an extra Higgs boson, then it could come along in all of these diagrams that I showed you, where we had a W boson, that's a particle in the Standard Model. We could also replace these same processes by having a charged Higgs boson in place of the W. And then that would be an extra process, an extra contribution. And one could arrange so that this makes a relative negative contribution to this. And so you add them together and it explains why you think that this is too small. It's because you're not seeing just this, you're seeing this plus something that you weren't expecting. And similarly, in this decay of a meson, the idea is that we could also have a contribution from the charged Higgs. And for some reason, this would make a positive relative contribution, and it would make this bigger than expected. And so that would explain those two puzzles. And finally, there's this process where we thought we were just watching W bosons decay, but it could be that in the particles that were decaying, unbeknownst to us, there were also some of these new charged Higgs particles contaminating what we thought were just W's decaying. And so that would make us think that W's are decaying faster because we have this extra contribution that we didn't think was there. So this could provide a unified explanation for these experimental puzzles. But there were some challenges. So one is that the new particles that we need in order to make this all work, it turns out that their masses would have to be very similar to the masses of the particles that we've already discovered. So that charged Higgs boson, it would have to have a mass that's not too much different from the W boson mass. And this neutral Higgs boson would have to have a mass which is no heavier than the one that we've discovered. So I say this is shocking because you would think we have the LHC, which can explore up to much higher energies. How could the LHC have failed to discover these new particles if they were so light? So that's one thing that would be surprising. And then another thing is that if you have these extra particles, then they could screw up all sorts of other successful predictions of the Standard Model. That is, they could be adding similar contributions to other processes where we don't need and we don't want an extra contribution because already what we know about agrees perfectly well with the experimental data. And so you might expect that if you do this, even if you fix up a few little problems like we were just talking about, you're going to mess up many more things and not have a consistent picture. And that was what we thought when we went into this, that if we kept exploring these extra predictions, we would find one that would just kill the model, and then that would be it. But instead, what happened was we explored these things one by one, and in every case we found that our new theory could be just barely consistent with what's observed, or maybe perfectly consistent. And furthermore, these extra particles, they could have been flying just below the radar, just below the sensitivity of the searches at the CERN Large Hadron Collider that were supposed to find them. And indeed, that was the case. We found that the sensitivity was just a little bit too low in these experiments, and so we could have such light particles. Let me just show you an example of one of these things that I said could get screwed up. If we have this extra Higgs boson, it would couple to another model, another particle in the standard model. It's related to the W boson, it's the Z boson, and it could make an extra contribution to the decays of the Z boson into a tau particle and its antiparticle. And so this is the sort of thing, this Z decaying into tau bar, it's extremely well measured. It's very consistent with the standard model. And so it kind of surprised us when we calculated this extra effect that it's still small enough that it doesn't hurt the theory. And this is just one example. We kept checking process after process, each time expecting, oh, this is going to kill it. Oh, this is going to kill it. And then we found, no, it doesn't kill it. That seemed amazing. And we started to wonder, could all of these things be just a coincidence? And we started getting very excited. Here I said eventually my collaborator I was working with, he got too busy with other things. And so he abandoned our project and gave me his blessing to keep on going. And so I had to finish it up by myself. But in any case, we got extremely excited and started thinking that maybe this could be real. You know, oftentimes theorists will invent theories to explain things that don't quite fit, and they'll do it thinking, well, maybe it could be, but probably it's not. And almost always it's not the real explanation. So it's kind of rare when you get so excited that you think maybe this could be reality. The other interesting thing is that our new theory made a number of predictions for new experimental effects that should be seen in upcoming experiments. And they would be rather dramatic because they would be predicting a level of a decay much higher than expected in the standard model. And so normally I don't work very late into the night because as Alfonso mentioned, I have other interests. I sing in a choir. I like to play the piano. I do chess puzzles. I like to read. So I'm not always working late into the night, but in that period when I got very excited, I was working all the time. I was working till midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, trying to get to the bottom of this theory. And eventually, I wrote a paper on it, and this was the title of the paper. And I'm just showing here something that appears at the end of the paper. Typically, scientists like to put acknowledgments at the end of their paper to say thank you to people who were helpful, who they just had useful discussions with. Mike Trott, he was the person who I was mentioning, who was involved at the beginning. And all of these people I had nice discussions with, helpful information from them. But there was one mysterious one here called Mila Huskat. And Huskat is a Danish word for a domestic cat. So this is a fake last name. Who was Mila Huskat? Well, that was Mila. One of the things I really enjoyed doing when I was in Copenhagen was there was a very nice animal shelter. And it was a good distance, 25 kilometers away on a scenic bike trail. So it was a very nice bike ride to go there and then to hang out with the cats. All the cats were living in these big walk-in cages, and you could just go in and walk into the cage and hang out with the cat, sit with the cat. So I got to know the cats. And Mila, she was a particularly nice one. Also one of the older ones who, if you know animal shelters, people like to adopt puppies and kittens before they will adopt older animals. She was one of the older ones, so she was having a little difficulty getting adopted, and I put up a little money to lower her adoption price to encourage someone to adopt her, and she did get adopted, so I was very happy for Mila. Anyway, Mila got acknowledged in my paper, and my girlfriend, I think she was a little bit miffed that the cat got acknowledged, but not her, because my girlfriend was also encouraging me a lot. Well, anyway, that was the story pretty much. And now you're probably wondering, well, what happened? Did all those experimental predictions come true? And did I get a call from Stockholm late at night? Well, unfortunately, I mentioned we were checking everything we could think of that might rule out this theory. And so we went down our list and we had many, many things that we checked. But there was one thing that we forgot to check. There was this particular bound state of a charm quark and a bottom quark that we forgot about. And it could also decay, get an extra contribution through the new Higgs boson. And this was the one thing which doesn't work. And when some other authors computed it, they found out that this badly screws up the prediction versus the observed value. So the theory was ruled out. And I wasn't surprised, because this is what normally happens. Normally, either your theory gets ruled out, or the experimental puzzle that you were trying to resolve goes away, because it turned out it was some kind of experimental error, some kind of background statistical fluctuation. So this is part of the course. And but nevertheless, it is when you're in that process where you don't know it's ruled out yet, and you think your theory maybe could be contributing to our understanding of nature at its fundamental level. That's what makes physics so exciting for me and for many theorists. It's kind of an addiction. And so that was the main thing I wanted to get across to you, was just what motivates us to do this kind of work, and why it's quite rewarding. So thanks for listening, and now I'll be happy to talk and take questions.
Thank you very much, Jim. It was very, very nice, the story that you told us. And well, I invite the people to ask some questions. I have one of my own, so I would like to start with that. And people are invited to ask the question. And it's more like a general kind of question about doing this research and research in general, but having the inspiration, the motivation to get into it. And I would like to tell us more directly to the students that are beginning their careers in these research areas, in different knowledge areas. But what is the advice that you can give them about involving in research more in this time of crisis and pandemic, that the collaboration are different from the past? Now we have the opportunity, as we were talking before the transmission, we have the opportunity to connect with each other using the technology. But how, or what is the motivation for youngest researchers in getting involved in the different areas?
Yeah,
that we know?
I think the most important thing is trying to stay connected with the bigger community. going to meetings and conferences and hearing what people are excited about. I mean, we can just, there are journals, we can read papers on journals, there's the archive, we can read the preprints there. We can see all the research that's coming out. But to get an idea of what's really exciting and what more people are pursuing is very useful to try to be involved in these kind of international conferences or seminars and get a feel for what are the hot topics. And, you know, sometimes you'll think of an idea which isn't yet a hot topic. And so maybe you'll make it a hot topic. That's more challenging. It's much easier to get on a bandwagon where people have already decided this is really hot stuff, and you'll tend to get attention if you work on that. If you go off and do something which is not yet hot, maybe you'll make a big splash, but it's also a bit risky.
Yeah, I know. Yes. And in your experience, how much affect the environment? You talking about Copenhagen in Denmark, that also is give you some motivation for doing your research. But over the years and your research is how much it depends on the environment, the university, the places that you are being in your research. How much it has impacted in your research?
I think I and other people always do their best work when they're in a place that makes them happy. And so, for instance, even if Copenhagen wasn't the center of the universe for theoretical physics, it has so many other things to offer, like culture, singing, concerts, biking, etc. It's also got the physics, but yeah, I spent a lot of my early career traveling to go to conferences, and eventually I found a few places that I like to go to over and over again. Denmark is one of them, and CERN is another, and Aspen is a third. So these days I try to, well, now we're not traveling at all, but when we do travel again, I'll be going mostly to those kind of places where I get extra inspiration for my work.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Jim. We have a question from Selim, which I'm saying hi from here. He's asking, can you talk a little bit about letting go of a promising idea that does not pan out?
Well, I mean, yeah. Sometimes you'll see people who don't let go when they should have. Oftentimes, those are people who are getting on in years, but not always. Sometimes you see people who are very determined to make their pet idea work in the face of nobody else thinks it works. And so I don't think that's a productive thing for anybody. On the other hand, you shouldn't give up too easily. So if you have something that you think has value, but it's not being recognized, it does sometimes require a little persistence to get people to pay attention. So I think you just have to find the right balance between those things, and knowing how much to believe in yourself. If you think you've got something that's really valuable, then yeah, I guess you should just keep trying to promote it. But if you have some doubts, and usually if you're not getting any kind of positive feedback from other people, usually it's a bad sign, because humanity as a whole, even if sometimes it's a little slow to pick up on good ideas, usually eventually they do. And so hopefully those good ideas are going to get recognized.
Perfect. We are waiting for another question. You have the chats from the YouTube and Facebook. Please ask some question, please. Thank you very much. And I have a question, Jim, and I want to show something in the screen, and I would like you to tell me what do you think and what do you feel with this. This one here. For me, it's amazing this paper that we have together with Jing, and I think it's amazing. I don't know how many papers are in the literature that have a psychology department and a physics department with one of the authors, but I want to hear your impressions with this paper.
Yeah, I'm afraid that's one of the ones that didn't catch on.
Yeah.
I think it's got about 4 citations. So it was a good try. And yeah, I think you just have to go with the attitude that sometimes you hit a winner and other times it's just not going to make such a big impression.
Yeah. But it was a nice idea, I think, at the moment. Also working with Jing and all the stuff, and it's one of the papers that I bring with me from Montreal. The other one is with in Concordia with Mariana. So it was a good, productive postdoc.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very nice. And another question that we have on the comments from Lorenzo. Diaz also say hi from him. I agree that Denmark is a great place, and the group of MBI is very nice. They invited me extra beer last year. So, Lorenzo's always in the interest of inviting you here to Puebla, so we are going to catch up that when the moment in-person activities are again. So there's going to be an invitation from here. Also, Ariana is asking us, how did you get interested in theoretical physics?
Yeah, when I was undergraduate freshman in college, I thought I started out as a chemistry major, but I think that was just because in high school, my best teacher was a chemistry teacher. And then, yeah, after my freshman year, I realized that I'm much more interested in physics. And, eventually it seemed to me that elementary particle physics was a very fundamental level of physics where you're trying to understand nature at its most microscopic level. So that appeals to a lot of people. It appealed to me. The big challenge was when I went to graduate school, because it was such a fashionable subject. Many theorists wanted to do that. But there wasn't enough place for all of them to find supervisors doing that. And I even remember David Politzer, who's now a Nobel laureate. He gave a talk to the new graduate students. All the professors at Caltech were supposed to introduce their research to the new graduate students. And David Politzer stood up in front of us and said, "Don't go into theory, there's no jobs." So, that was a little discouraging, but of course, it didn't discourage most of us. And so, yeah, it's just one of those things where you have to really be determined. If you think that's what you want to do, it takes a lot of determination, of course, to do anything significant requires that. But yeah, that was my early days of getting into particle physics.
Thank you, Jim. We have another question from Maria Fernanda. Can you give an advice about how to make a good research, or how to not to give up during the process of research? Thank you.
Yeah, so I think one thing is to find collaborators. That's something that's very motivating to do research. It's difficult to work by yourself, and that paper I showed you, it's not typical. And for most people, for me and for most people in theoretical physics, it's rather rare to have a paper all by yourself. So yeah, if you can find people to collaborate with that you enjoy working with, and you feel like that you can have a good rapport back and forth, come up with good ideas, and sometimes that can involve meeting people outside of your own institute. For instance, if you can go to another institute to give a seminar or participate in a conference, you'll meet others. You can talk to them, bounce ideas off of them. Sometimes that will result in an idea for collaboration.
Perfect. Lorenzo is asking, could you share how it was to take courses with Feynman? Did he prepare his classes or would improvise? He was very hardworking in the years when he was so famous.
That's an interesting question, because it happens. I just recently put out some lectures of a course that I took while I was Feynman's TA in the last year of his life, and I wrote up the lecture notes from that course, and they're going to become a book. So I've been thinking about that quite a bit in the last months. Yeah, it seems that Feynman didn't spend a lot of time preparing those lectures, and of course at that time he was probably already suffering from his illness, and maybe that contributed to it, but maybe it was also his habit that he had things so much up here already, he thought he could just review them a little bit and then extemporize, just lecture off the seat of his pants. And I think that's what many of his lectures were, the ones that I attended, which in some cases made them a little bit disorganized, but nonetheless very interesting.
Perfect. So Lorenzo is saying that for sure you are invited to Puebla to come here. So when the time comes, you are invited. So I want to take a question that I want to take from Fefo, that always asks this question to his speakers. So what is your best memory that you have in your career in theoretical physics? What is your best memory that you have? Your best anecdote about that?
Best anecdote about my career. Well, I'll tell you one that comes to mind, even though maybe it's not. Yeah, okay, I'll tell you one. It's about David Politzer again, and from my graduate school days. Yeah, David Politzer, very brilliant man, and he liked to talk to Mark Wise, who was another professor at Caltech, and their office was right across from mine. So whenever David Politzer was talking to Mark, I could hear what they were saying. And one day I heard David describing to Mark the exact same problem that I was working on. It was a problem that was suggested to me by my supervisor, to try and figure out what was wrong with a person who came and visited and gave a talk, somebody who made some quite controversial claims. And so I was working on trying to figure out what was wrong with those claims. And then I hear David Politzer explaining to Mark Wise what he thinks is wrong and how he's working with one of the other graduate students on this. And so I went over there and I said, I'm working on this too. Do you mind if I listen in? For some reason, David Politzer had taken dislike to me. I don't know why, but he kind of grudgingly said, yeah, okay. But I could tell he didn't really want me there, and he didn't want me to be part of their collaboration. So actually, it was extremely stressful, because then I had to compete against him and this other graduate student who was one of the more advanced graduate students, and it was just me against them. So it was extremely stressful time in my life. But the reason I remember it fondly now is that eventually I was able to make progress on the problem. And one day, David Politzer was in Ben Grinstein's office. Ben was a postdoc at that time. And he was explaining what he and the other student, his collaborator, had figured out on this problem. And a bunch of graduate students were in there listening. So I went and listened. And at the end of his presentation on the blackboard, I jumped up and I said, "Oh, but if I may," actually, they were kind enough to share with me the draft of the paper they were writing. So I already knew what he was going to say. And I already knew there was a problem with it. So I jumped up, I went to the blackboard, and I explained to everybody what was the problem with their idea. And so after that, David Politzer changed his mind about me, and he seemed to like me. And I got a paper out of it. So I found out that John Preskel, my supervisor, and some others had been betting like a bottle of wine or something on who was going to win this competition. And so I was very relieved when I ended up winning it.
Nice. Excellent. Thank you very much for that, John. It's very nice. A question we have, how can we help people to readapt to the social life after the COVID-19 in this scenario of now in this research in the academia, how we can readapt to the new reality that's going to live after we finish this crisis?
Oh, but I mean, after we finished it, meaning when things are back to normal?
Yeah.
Or
yeah. Yes.
I mean, when things are back to normal, I hope that we will keep some of the benefits that have come out of this crisis. Alfonso, you may remember that on very snowy days, it wasn't easy to get to work, and sometimes classes would even have to be canceled. Well, this is the great thing about online classes. We don't have to worry about that now. So I hope that when we have bad weather, we could just switch to online class and not have to cancel classes. And even when I teach now, I've been taking advantage of breakout rooms, which in some ways, I think it makes it easier for students to interact with each other than if they're in a big classroom and you want to split them up into small groups. Sometimes it's not so practical, whereas with the application, putting them into breakout rooms, it seems to work rather well. So yeah, I tend to think the opposite. I hope that, and similarly, I was saying to Alfonso before we came live here, I think one of the good things to come out of this is that now we are having conferences where you don't have to spend a lot of money on registration fee. You don't have to spend money on travel. You don't have to pollute the air with more greenhouse gas to travel. You can attend the conference in a more environmentally sensible way. And so I hope that we will hang on to some of those things and not just go back to life as normal, because as you know, life is getting less and less normal with climate change every year, and this is something that we have to take seriously.
Yes, for sure. And Jim, we're very close to the end of our very nice talk. So I'm going to give you a series of words, and I want that you to give me an idea about the word that I'm going to give you, and then we move to the next word. So I'm going to begin with the first word is bicycle.
Bicycle. You want me to answer the one word?
Yeah, and I continue with the next one. With a phrase. You can say a phrase, a word, an idea.
Okay, well, you reminded me of that old beat-up bicycle that I loaned you. So that's what comes to mind.
Perfect. McGill.
McGill. Well, nowadays McGill is being criticized because he was a slave owner. So that's what comes to mind.
Okay. Montreal.
Montreal. Crowded.
Okay. CERN.
CERN. Beautiful oasis.
Copenhagen.
Mecca of culture.
Perfect. Physics.
Physics, the great escape.
Young researchers.
Young researchers are the old researchers of tomorrow.
Perfect. Alfonso.
My good buddy in Pueblo.
Thank you very much, Jim. And I would like to ask you for a final thought. I would like to ask you for a message for our the people that are connected here, that for our students here in Puebla, also from psychology and from physics that are connected. I would like for you to give them a final message, a motivated message for doing research, for involving in science, for involving in the different areas.
Well, I would say that we're living in a world that needs science more than ever now, but it's also one where there's a certain amount of skepticism and resistance to scientific thinking. And so we have to try to fight that and make the scientific point of view be heard. And so keep at it. Don't give up on that. The world needs us, I think.
Perfect. And I just one final word that I miss. Choir, singing.
Choir, singing, well, on hold.
Perfect. So thank you very much, Jim, for everything. It's very nice for me to meet you again after 5 years that I arrived here to Puebla. As I say at the beginning of our chat, it was very nice to be here in Montreal, and also to stay there at the department with the lunchtime. I remember when Robert knocked at our door and come to us to our lunchtime, and we were talking about The Hobbit or another kind of stuff that emerged there. And so thank you very much, Jim, for this great opportunity to talk with you, to chat with you. And also, as I told before, hopefully one day we're going to have you here in Puebla to enjoy all the stuff that we have here. Probably not soon, but when the pandemic ends. So thank you very much, Jim, for this great opportunity. I hope you have a good time with us here today.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure. Thanks for the thoughtful questions from everybody.
Thank you very much, Jim. And to all, thank you very much for your participation. At the bottom of your screen, you can see our next talk from Marik van Boeg from Groningen about mind wandering. And also we have another talk that I'm going to announce today from Alberto Huijosa at October 14 at 7 p.m. about holography, gravity, dimensions, extreme theory, and another mirage. So thank you very much for being here, and also stay tuned for all the activities. So I'm going to close now the broadcast, but I'm going to stay with Jim a little bit for a couple of minutes only to say goodbye. So thank you very much for everything, Jim. Bye.
Bye.